Barry, thanks for the time. I think let's begin by just looking at your findings. But give me first, how many companies were involved in the survey before we talk about the young employers who are now seen as a risk?
Well, it was actually 1,000 young employees between the ages of 18 and 24, and 500 senior decision makers in those organisations.
Now, you are making me think twice about my young producer because she's 23. So when she handed me this report, I was saying to myself, I shouldn't trust her with the information that she gives me. Maybe we should be a little bit more worried. But what is the issue there? Is it a question of judgment, or is it a question of perhaps companies themselves not taking the right decisions in terms of deciding how much to give them, how much access to give them?
Well, I think what was interesting in the survey was that more than a third of the senior decision makers were actually concerned that the young employees would be the main culprits of these data breaches that we have and security violations. But actually, when it came down to it, the bad habits that the senior decision makers were worried about that the young people would have, they were actually worse in terms of those behaviours themselves. So it was rather strange the way that played out.
Yeah.
So, for instance, people had far too much access to too many things within their networks. You know, the first thing that a lot of the young people did when they joined a company was to look and see how much their boss earned, so they had access to payroll data. And, you know, you've really got to make sure that people only have access to the appropriate data at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go on.
No, another thing was password sharing. It was one of the main concerns of the senior decision makers. It kept 56% of them actually up at night. But password sharing, there was a fair amount of password sharing amongst the younger workers. But again, the senior decision makers were actually worse than the youngsters at sharing passwords. And one might not think that's such a big deal, but the thing is, all of our organisations have hackers trying to get into them. Doesn't matter who we are. And that revolves around, or has an effect on our brand reputation. We can lose our data. And it can really do our companies damage. And these young people, effectively, they're going to be the workforce of the future. They're going to be the leaders of the future. So we need to see, you know, the way that people have worked has changed. These young people, they're always online. They work 24/7. They expect to be able to do anything from anywhere. And as security vendors, we need to increase security for those people, but we mustn't get in the way of them doing their job. So.
Yeah. So it does sound like these young people are simply learning from their older colleagues, so maybe we shouldn't pillory them too much. But one of the other stats that I found very interesting was 47% of these younger workers sharing social media posts, and you have to think about absolutely what that means for the brand going forward.
Yeah, and I think that there is a concern from the senior decision makers that the younger people will be putting out on social media the fact that they don't like their company, or something bad happens in their company, or there's some security breaches that could happen as a result of it. You know, if people put out any information that gets out is part of that sort of tapestry of things that can go together to make a security breach. So the companies need to have a policy about this as well. It's a joint responsibility. The young people will do what young people do. They post stuff on social media. They need some guidance as to what is appropriate and what they should be doing in context of their work.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're saying perhaps more policing of the young people would be in order.
I'm not necessarily saying it's policing of the young people. I think it's more policies that need to be applied, and everybody throughout the company, from the CEOs downwards, they need to understand what the policies are, how they should work. And at the end of the day, there also needs to be an element of technology, making sure that people can't access the wrong things, that people have what we call multi-factor authentication to actually help with sharing of passwords and things like that. Because all of these different attacks, it doesn't matter whether it's a phishing attack, so-called, or a malware attack or whatever, they all come down to identity. Basically, somebody manages to pretend to be somebody else or gets hold of their password and credentials.